Magic words. I got excited because I thought it was going to be, the derivation of alakazam and abracadabra. And
that's a college 3-credit course.
That's magic words. I read it wrong.
I saw an article. You know me, I'm looking at stuff all the time, and I see the magic words that you can use to get people to do what you want. So I checked this professor out.
Uh-huh.
He's been called a persuasion expert, which is funny because I'm sure he says he's not. What to say to get people to give you your way.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going, this is really kind of an interesting. What are those words? And I started watching some of his
Can
stuff.
I guess? Sight unseen? Can I guess?
No.
Please.
You'll never know. Wrong.
May I? Not can I?
Wrong.
Should I?
Wrong.
With a cherry?
Wrong.
Pretty please.
You'll get the power. This guy, we'll start out with language of agency and identity. What you find out is you change one word in a sentence when you're writing or asking something.
My agency has magic words. You didn't get it. Those are the 4 magic words.
So there are ways to change one word or part of a phrase to get a 30% increase in people responding and doing what you want.
Let's open with that word every episode.
So this is used in sales. It's used in politics. It's also used for scammers. They know how to manipulate words to motivate people to do things. Magic Words, What to Say to Get Your Way is his newest book that we're going to be talking about. But he also wrote How to Change Anyone's Mind. His bio is incredible. Let me give his intro.
Yeah, please, go.
So Professor Jonah Berger is a Wharton School professor, internationally best-selling author of Magic Words, Contagious, Invisible Influence, The Catalyst, world-renowned expert on word-of-mouth, social influence, consumer behavior. He's published over 80 articles in top-tier academic journals, teaches one of the world's most popular online courses. Obviously, he knows.
Bigger than the Taylor Swift course?
Yeah, I think it's right up there. Was dubbed one of the most creative people in business by Fast Company. Yeah. And he works with Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, the Gates Foundation, and now, really.
Jonah, I have, my questions tend to be more on the banal side. So my first interest was what you were doing, what you were studying, where you were heading that led you to the revelation of these sort of magical words that you talk about.
You know, it's so interesting. Almost everything we do, it involves language, right? You and I are talking right now using language. At the end of this, if you press a magic button, it might spit out a transcript in written language.
Right.
Language is how salespeople sell. They're how leaders lead. They're how teachers teach. We read newspapers using language. We watch movies using language. All these things involve language. And I slowly started realizing, wow, while we think a lot about the ideas we want to communicate, right? What are the big picture things I want to get across? We think a lot less about the specific words we use when we communicate those ideas.
Correct.
And I started realizing, that's unfortunately a mistake, right? Because subtle shifts in the language we use can have a big impact. We had a young son, and he would often use the word peas. And so he'd say, for example, he'd want a certain food. So he'd say, peas, whatever food, or peas brow bear, which was his brown bear. And what I started realizing is, wow, this is the first time he realized that language had power. Peas meant please. He didn't have his L's yet. So
right.
He would figure it out. But you realize, if I ask for something and you don't give it to me, and then I say peas, I'm more likely to get it, right? I'm more likely to get what I want. And so we realized language has power. And I think we all at some point in our lives have realized language has power. And I became interested in, what are those powers? What are those magic words? And how can we take advantage of that power?
Oh. And one of the areas which is really, really interesting is words that attach you to an identity and how they work better. One of the examples was you get a 30% better response rate when you present something a certain way as opposed to another. So why you talk about that? Because that 30% is a huge increase to motivate people to do what you want. And by the way, I love that John was called a persuasion expert. But it kind of is when you know the words that can persuade, right?
There was a mob guy we had on who was also a persuasion expert.
But that was it. He didn't use words.
No, not so much.
He used the blackjack, a pistol, electric shock, nipple.
We got it. Yeah,
we understood.
Okay, understood.
So talk about that, how you can increase participation, make somebody activate 30% more by doing something simple.
So let me tell you about a great old research study that was done. And this was out in California a number of decades ago. And they went into a local preschool and they were trying to get kids to do something kids don't want to do, which was clean up. And so for some of the kids, they said, hey, can you help clean up? There was a mess. There's crayons on the floor. There are blocks everywhere. Can you help clean up? But for a different group of kids, they tried a subtle but importantly different strategy. They said, hey, can you be a helper? Not can you help clean up, but can you be a helper? Now, the difference between help and helper is really small. It's only a couple of letters, adding the ER to the end of help. Yet that led to about a 30% increase in kids cleaning up the classroom. And you could say, well, that's cute, but those are just kids. Like, why do we care about cleaning up? What about bigger, important things with adults? And so more recently, someone did a study applying these ideas to voting. So for some people, they sent them a note saying, hey, please go vote. And for other people, they said, hey, please be a voter. And again, the difference between vote and voter is even smaller. It's only one letter there, right? Adding an R to the end of vote. Yet that led to about a 15% increase in people's likelihood of turning out in the polls. And so you might ask, well, why, right? Why is helper more impactful than help? Why is voter more impactful than vote? And it turns out it comes down to the difference between actions and identities, right? We all know that we should do certain things. We should exercise, and we should read the news, and we should eat healthy, and we should vote, and we should help, but we're busy. We don't have the time, right? But what we care more about than certain actions are holding desired identities. We all want to see ourselves as smart and knowledgeable, and at least maybe a little bit athletic, and all those different things. And so we engage in actions to support those identities. If I want to see myself as athletic, I better go for a run. If I want to see myself as healthy, I better eat salad once in a while. And so if we turn actions like voting into identities like being a voter, it makes people much more likely to take those actions, right? Voting, oh, I know I should do it, but I'm busy. But hold on, if voting is an opportunity to be a voter, now I'm much more likely to do it. And so by turning those actions into identities, we can make people more likely to take the desired action.
But now, John, we avoid politics on this show pretty stringently. So I'm not trying to get us into a political conversation. I'm just fascinated based on what you said. By changing your language of invitation to identify with a group or to self-identify, you're able to create an action. Do you feel that it is then possible, I'm going to keep it in the voting world, that language alone could have made a voter identify with a particular party or a particular cause or a particular candidate? Are we that malleable and susceptible to language that you could take it a step further?
I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that, one word makes everybody do everything in any way, shape, or form. But on the margins, these things matter, right? Let's say, I asked you, which is worse, losing or being a loser? That's an easy thing to answer, right? You say, well, being a loser is much worse.
Right.
Is cheating on a test bad? Sure, cheating on a test is bad, but being branded a cheater would be even worse, right? And so these are all cases where it's an action and identity. If I told you about two people, one is a runner and someone else runs, which do you think goes for runs more often? You'd say, well, probably the runner, right? It sounds like a stable part of who they are. I'll tell you a terrible version of this. There's recently something in the press where somebody said, a certain actor had not just farted on set, but they were a farter, right? They called him a farter. Oh, no. And now a farter's like, right? It's like, oh, I am a farter. It's a stable part. I would be
own it. You got to own it, right?
And so you're much more likely to avoid negative things if they would lead you to hold that identity. And so it's a subtle difference, but the difference between actions and identities is an important one.
So what pops out to me, too, is we have a whole generation now of people who don't just influence, they're influencers.
Exactly.
How does that sit with you?
I think that was a really smart branding move from whether you think about it as these platforms that have created these things or the individuals themselves, right? People don't just create, they are creators. They don't just influence, they are influencers. Suddenly now it doesn't sound just like a side hustle. It sounds like a full-time job, right? It sounds like an ingrained part of who people are. And so I think these subtle shifts can have a big impact, right? If you want to help someone get a job, right? Rather than saying, oh, they lead or they're innovative, saying they are an innovator or they are a leader is going to make it seem like it's a more stable part of who they are. And so these small shifts can actually make a big difference.
Well, it also legitimizes people getting paid for being influencers. It is now a job.
Also, for me, as I listened to that explanation, I could feel this thing come up in me, which was pushback against that. Because if someone says to me, listen, I'm representing this thing and I'd like to try and influence you to see if it works for you, I'd like to try and do that. I feel like I'm immediately more open to it. If they say, well, this person's an influencer, this is what they do, is they bring people over to their influence. I go, now I'm immediately resisting you.
Can I jump to something else from that? And again, we stay away from politics. And I know you're going to use a Trump example and other examples, but my brother told me this years ago, and he used to consult big industry. And influencer, you're pushing back because there's a certainty implied there that they know what.
Right,
okay,
right, yeah.
Well, my brother once said to me, the best leaders, the biggest guys in the world, there's one thing they all have in common. They speak with certainty. And I learned on radio, which I did a long time, they said, repeating stuff over and over again till you're sick of it. When you're sick of it, the public is just noticing it. So you got to stay with it. And certainty works. And I know you use Trump and you predicate it by, doesn't matter if you hate him or love him. Explain the certainty there and why certainty works.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to get into politics either. People are allowed to vote however they want to vote and believe whatever they want to believe. But whether you like Trump or not, you can't disagree that he's done a pretty amazing job of getting people to adopt his ideas. Mm-hmm. Right? If you like those ideas, you're probably pretty happy about it. If you hate those ideas, you're probably pretty unhappy about it. But one question, an interesting question is why has it worked, right? Even if you don't like it, you can't deny that it's working for at least some set of people. And so why? And so if you look at the way he speaks, it's not actually unique to him, right? He speaks the same way that so-called gurus speak, that startup founders often speak, that sort of famous leaders often speak. He speaks with a great deal of certainty. Right? He doesn't say, oh, this might happen. This may be a good idea. I think this. He speaks in absolutes, right? He doesn't speak in grays, shades of gray. He speaks in black and white, right? I'm going to build a great wall, the best wall that's ever been built. America doesn't have victories anymore. We used to, but we don't have them. He speaks that sort of, this is exactly how it is. And contrast that with how a lot of us speak, right? I'll pick on myself, for example. I'm an academic. And so we tend to use a lot of hedges. Right? Oh, well, maybe in some situations this might be, and I think this, and this is possible. And it's not surprising then that other people sit there going, well, wow, if you're not even sure yourself, why should I listen to you? Right? There's a lot of research, for example, in the context of financial advisors that shows that the more certainty someone speaks with, even by the way, if they're wrong, the more certainty they speak with, the more likely people are to pick them as a financial advisor because people are sitting there going, wow, you seem so confident. You must be right. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't mean to suggest that we should never hedge, right? There are certainly cases where we may want to hedge. We may want to step back. We may want to say this might be true, or I think, or things along those lines. But we certainly shouldn't just say those things because it's easy. Right? Some of us do that because it's a simple verbal tick, right? We're sitting there going, oh, I'm not sure. I want to buy myself time. And so I'm going to hedge to give myself a chance to think about what I want to say. But when we're doing that, we're subtly undermining our own impact, right? And there are better and worse ways to hedge. So there's a difference between saying, if someone asks you for your opinion, saying, oh, I don't know, versus I think, hey, this is a great idea, but there are 3 things that need to happen for this to work. Right? That's a situation where, yes, I'm not saying it's for sure it's going to happen. I'm calling out the uncertainty, right? I'm saying, I think it's a good idea, but for it to work, these things need to happen. And so what I'm suggesting is not that we should or never use certainty, but we should strategically speak with certainty.
Interesting, because my background also was running ad agencies and working with clients. The more certainty you can put in your sell, that you're legally allowed to say. A lot of them have asterisks because you can't say guaranteed to make your dog live longer. But if you had a food that was guaranteed this food will make your dog live longer with certainty, that thing would fly off the shelves. And advertisers cheat it. When you consult, because you consult some of the biggest companies in the world, about sales, is that come up about pushing the envelope to as close to certainty in messaging as you possibly can?
Yeah, so I want to be careful here. I'm not advocating that people lie, and I'm not advocating that people be overconfident, because there are certainly situations where when we say something with certainty, and then later on someone realizes that what we said isn't true, it hurts us, right? It has a negative effect. And so that's not what I'm saying. I think the first thing I'm saying is, if you are hedging just because you're used to hedging because it's convenient, make sure you're hedging on purpose. Make sure you're hedging because you want to communicate uncertainty, not just because it's easy. And by the way, there are even times we want to express doubt, right? So if I'm on a team or I'm a leader walking into a meeting and I say, this is how it is, it's going to make everyone else feel like they shouldn't share their opinions because I'm already so certain. But if I walk in, right, and I'm not sure, and I use language that indicates I'm not sure, now it's going to make other people feel more comfortable sharing their own opinion, right? Going back to politics, if you're talking with a family member who sees, things from the other direction, if you come in there being like, I can't believe this and that, they're going to stick to their guns. But if you show some doubt, they'll be more receptive to your viewpoint because they realize that you're open to their viewpoint as well. And so again, it's a strategic tool, right? Just like any other tool. There are times for a hammer. There are times for a saw. Same thing here. There are times to be certain, and there are times to express them.
What boggles me, I guess, in my own life is that when I have expressed certainty and I'm wrong, I'm held accountable for it. When others express certainty and they're wrong, they seem to somehow be able
to on the air. Look, can I jump around a little, Jonah, and give you, because this is what blew me away, because you don't even think about this. We're getting a new dog. We're actually getting a hearing dog for my wife because she's got hearing issues. But I love that you asked the question, did the dog go out or did you take the dog out? And you point out, all of a sudden, this is my job to take the dog out? So you add you in there and it completely becomes a whole different attitude, correct?
So this is something I found interesting. So, I work with different companies, organizations. Someone asked me, hey, can you figure out what's working on our social media? So I went out there, analyzed all their social media posts, looks at what's getting engagement, what's not, found one word, the word you, had a big impact on engagement, right? On social media, when you say, rather than here are 5 tips to save money, you say here are 5 tips to save you money. Or if I said, ways to be healthier, these are ways for you to be healthier, adding you increases engagement. It's almost like a stop sign, right? When people see that word, their attention draws in, they go, oh, this is speaking more to me than it might have been otherwise. And so then the company said, fantastic, that's really wonderful. Can you do the same thing for our help pages? So imagine you have an issue with your iPhone, your watch isn't working, your printer's not doing whatever. You go to their site to figure out why. And so there we actually found that you had the opposite effect. You wasn't helpful. You didn't make those pages better. It made people feel like they were less helpful. And so I was sitting there going, well, why, right? Why is you good on social media, but you is not so good on help pages? And I realized 2 things. First, you is good for grabbing attention, but on help pages, things like help pages, you don't need to grab people's attention. People are already there. But second, you can make people feel like, well, you're blaming me. Your fault. I'm responsible for this. If I say, hey, if your phone is broken, you need to do X, Y, and Z, you're sitting there going, why is it my fault? Right? It's your phone. Your phone is broken. Why do I have to do something about it? And so these are what can be called accusatory use, right? And these often happen in our personal lives, right? You get home and someone says, hey, did you walk the dog? Did you make dinner? At the office, someone said, did you finish that report? And what that person really means is, hey, did the report get done? Did the dog get walked? Is there dinner available? But they feel, right? You feel like you're being attacked. And so you say something negative back and suddenly you and your spouse or boss or whatever is are getting into it. Not because they meant to get into it with you, right? Because they feel like the word you was attacking them. And so we need to be careful when we use the word you, right? It can be a great way to grab attention, particularly in social media or email or other sorts of communication places. But we got to worry about the accusatory stuff. We got to worry about people feeling blamed or feeling like we're saying it's their fault for something.
This is on track but off track. I get fascinated by this stuff. So I assume in your personal relationships with your significant other, spouse, whatever it may be, that we drag therapy speak into our relationships. You have a professional understanding of this. I'm sure you are able to employ some of these techniques in your interpersonal relationships. Does your significant other ever go, stop doing that to me? I know what you're doing. Does it ever come up?
It turns out my spouse is also a behavioral scientist, and so she's even more aware of than one might be in a usual situation. But the nice thing is we can both sort of sit there and analyze it, right? We can be like, well, why did I feel that way? Or did you mean it that way? Or maybe that's this. And so it's almost like a little mini experiment going on every day in our own life.
Well, to that end, if everybody, because what you're doing is you're educating people as to how language can have this effect. Do you feel like if everybody understood and was able to some degree adopt some of the techniques you're talking about, would it make communication work better? Or would we all go, now that we all know it, none of us are being influenced by it?
Yeah, it's tough. And sometimes people also say things like, "Oh, is this manipulation?" Right? Or you just getting people to do something they wouldn't do otherwise. And I think what's tough there, right, is manipulation depends a little bit on the eye of the beholder, right? So if you're using certain words to get people to eat more fruits and vegetables and exercise more and support good causes and take better care of the planet, people would say, great, keep doing it. And if instead you're using language to get people to buy junk and destroy the planet and treat their bodies badly, then you'd say it's not so good. And so I think with many of these tools, it often happens without our awareness, particularly in spoken communication. Right? There's an interesting difference between written communication and spoken communication. So I'll give you another example. Take a certainty cue, like saying like fillers, right? You might ask me a question. I go, well, right? And that makes people seem uncertain. It makes them seem like they don't know what they're talking about, not surprisingly. Imagine someone did that in written communication. Right? Imagine someone wrote you an email that said, well, you'd sit there going, what is this person doing? You would never do that in written communication, in part because written communication is different, right? In written communication, you have more time to think about what you're saying, to edit it, to make it just perfect, right? To make it less repetitive before you don't have that time in spoken communication. Spoken communication, you just don't want to sit there seeming like you don't know what to say, right? So you fill in that conversational space. And so while in written communication, sometimes it's easier to pick up when someone's trying to persuade us, when someone's using a certain technique. In spoken, it's a lot harder because it just flies by really quickly, both for the speaker and for the listener.
Jonah, could you, and I don't remember the example, but I remember it blew me away. We're in writers' rooms. We create shows, and you want people to be creative. And you gave an example. It was like being hit with a bat of how to engage somebody with solutions to problems, different ways to say it, which could yield a more creative result. Could you give what that example was?
Yeah, so there's a great old study, again, that looked at this experiment where they asked people to solve a variety of tough problems, difficult things, making choices, coming up with creative solutions, all the things you might do in a writer's room. And for some people, they asked them to use the traditional approach to solving a problem, to being creative. Think about what you should do. Right? Think about what you should do in this situation. For another set of people, they ask them to do something very slightly different. Rather than ask them to think about what they should do, they ask them to think about what they could do. And again, the difference between should and could is very small. It's only a few letters different. Yet that had a big impact on how good a problem solver they were and how creative they became. Thinking in terms of coulds made people come up with a lot better and more creative solutions.
It's unbelievable.
And the why, though, makes a lot of sense, right? When we think about shoulds, it makes us think there's one right answer. What should I do? There's one right thing, and I just have to discover it. I'm going to think and think and think till I get there. Whereas when I'm thinking in coulds, I open my blinders a little bit, right? Now I'm looking around to think about what's possible, right? We've all done brainstorming where not everything that's possible is a good idea. So I'm not saying all of those things you come up with are good ideas, but by thinking about what you could do, you think about a broader set of things, which helps you come up with a better solution overall.
It took me right out as a guy who's always tasked with that, writing and thinking of solutions. It was out of the box. All of a sudden, it opened up, getting free. Really just that one word gave me the freedom to think outside the box. You gave me the freedom in asking me that. Outside the box. And I've watched writer rooms where you're trying to guess what's in the showrunner's head. If I say, what could we do? What could the character do? You go, he could mountain climb. We can go as big as we want and pull it back. So it hit me.
And my question is, now that you've had this revelation, how could it serve me?
And should it serve you?
Well, should it serve?
So should it? I'm back to should, could, can, whatever. It's, you know what, Jonah, the books are fascinating. I would love to have you back on.
You know what I want to ask before we say goodbye to you is, I know initially when Peter first told me about you and your work, he said 4 magic words. I don't know that we've laid them out there. Are there really 4 magic words that would change communication instantly?
So I would say there are a number of buckets of magic words, 6 types of magic words. Okay. I put them in a framework I like to call the SPEAK framework.
Yes.
For the S is the language of similarity and difference. The P is the language of posing questions. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but questions are so powerful. They do a lot of interesting work in communication. The E is for the language of emotion. The A is for the language of agency and identity. We talked about some of those, right? Being a voter rather than voting, helper rather than help. And then the last 2 letters are the language of confidence and the language of concreteness. And we talked a little about that language of concreteness, so the language of certainty, talking about fillers and talking about hedges and those sorts of things. And so each of those 6 buckets are a type of language. There aren't just 4 magic words. I wish there were, but there's types of language that we can use in a variety of situations.
So what else can you do? While we're on that, because you brought up questions, and I love questions because asking questions.
Well, I was going to say, I just had an example of one at a talk back that I did, where I do an entertainment Q&A show, but it was before the election, and somebody asked me, of course, they're allowed to ask me anything, but we usually keep it to show business stuff. But they said, who are you voting for? And what I did is I said, you know what, let me answer that question with a question. What do you care about? What are the things you care about most? I'll tell you what I care about, and you tell me what you care about, and then, we'll
see where you go. But
we'll see where we are. But it was a much more interesting way, because I think that what I found in my conversations with people, particularly on politics and identification, is the minute you say, I'm of this party, or I'm of this candidate, or I'm of that, communication stops. But if I say, well, here's what I care about. I care that people get seen and heard and treated fairly. Well, I do too. Okay. I care about people feeling safe in their homes and their communities. Oh, I do too. I go, okay. Well, so we all care about the same thing. So now it's just a question of how do we make as many people as possible have that, right? Yeah. And it becomes a very different conversation.
But what's interesting, again, his take on questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Jason's example shows a number of things that I like a lot, right? One is you can use questions almost to deflect things. Right? Someone asks you a question you either don't want to answer, you don't think is appropriate. You can ask them a question back. Questions are almost like spotlights, right? They shine attention on something in a conversation, in one's mind, and you can use them to direct the focus of conversations. But they can also be really nicely switch the field of something, right? Politics is, as you said, often feels like this field where Democrats are on one end and Republicans are on the other, and there's sort of no middle ground. But there's a different field on which we're all in the same spot, right? A different dimension. We all care about our families. We all want the country to be better off. We all, want the best for our children. All these things that we have in common, and sometimes starting with what we have in common. And this is actually a lot of what I talk about in a different book called The Catalyst, which is all about changing people's minds. But really starting with that understanding, starting with understanding who you're talking to and what they care about, and starting on the same page rather than starting at a place of difference, can make you more likely to listen to one another. There's this great old Heineken sort of campaign or skit that's online you can watch, where they take people that you'd think would hate each other, so like misogynists and women, or people that hate transgender people and someone who's transgendered, and they have them have a conversation. So rather than starting by realizing they hate each other, they start by doing something in common. Right? They start by having a conversation about something else. They start by building a bar together. They start by doing something that connects them. And then along the way, they realize, well, wait, this is a person who in theory I wouldn't like. But now once I've gotten to know them, they're not so one-dimensional, right? Mm-hmm. They're not just this category. They're a person. And once they're a person, that category is part of who they are, but it's not the only part of who they are. Now I'm much more interested in keeping that conversation.
Also, you point out that asking a question in the workplace reflects well on you, because we are narcissists. So the fact that you were smart enough to come to me to ask me the question makes you, right? Isn't that kind of the gist?
This is a really simple point, but a good one, right? We all think about asking for advice. We all know someone who knows more about something than we do, right? Maybe it's a colleague, a peer, a boss, somebody, but often we're afraid to ask for advice. Maybe that person won't know the answer, or they'll be busy. We don't want to bother them. But even worse, they'll think less of us, right? By asking them for advice, they'll think we don't know what we're doing, and so we don't want to ask. Turns out that intuition's completely wrong. It's not that asking for advice makes you seem worse. It's not that it has no effect. In fact, just the opposite. It makes you seem more competent and more knowledgeable. And if you wonder why, it's not just because asking for advice makes you seem curious, which is a good thing, but it also takes advantage of other people's egocentrism, right? We all love to think that we give it good advice, right? If I asked you guys, do you give good advice? You wouldn't sit there going, no, I don't give good advice, right? You'd say, oh, me, of course I give good advice, right? I give great advice. And so when someone comes to us and asks us for our advice, we sit there going, wow, that person's so smart. Out of all the people they could have asked, they asked me. They must have really good taste, right? And so we think positively about them as a result. And so the clear take home is just ask for advice. Not only do we get that useful information, but it'll make you seem smart.
But you're sucking up. You're sucking up while you're doing.
No, I get it. It's a dopamine hit. I'm doing a show now with a bunch of younger actors, and several of them have come up and said, "Hey, how do you find yourself doing this or that or the other thing?" And it is one of those things where you go, "Well, I feel really good if I'm able to pass any of my experience on." It's very sweet of them to ask me. I totally get what he's saying.
Well, I like this. Oh yeah, but you never think about it until also you point. And I know I could keep you on all day long. Tense. Movie was good. Movie is good. Huge difference. I mean, these are like cataclysmic. You don't even realize what that says when you ask that question, and you just change that thing, right? Just tense. Tense can be huge.
Yeah, well, think about it. When you say the movie was good, it suggests that when I saw it that time, it was good. When you say the movie is good, it suggests that for everyone, for all time, it will be fantastic, right? When you say the food was good, it sounds like on the Tuesday you went to the restaurant, it was decent. But if you say the food is good, it suggests that everyone will love it whenever they.
But Jonah, there's a bigger thing to that, especially if you have kids. And I don't know if you have kids or how young they are, but if you have kids in their 20s, they don't say the movie was good. If it's a cool movie, they say the movie is good, because then they're attached somehow as if they had part in making that movie. It's an identity. It becomes identity.
Yeah. And it also, though, because if you're willing to say that something is good, if you're willing to take that, it's called an assertion. You want to say not just it was good for me when I experienced it, but it is good in general. People sit there going, wow, you sound pretty certain, right, of what you're saying. It must be pretty good, right? If you were willing to say it is good, if you're willing to make this judgment about forevermore others will like it, then they infer you must be pretty certain, and so the thing must be.
And then there's the review that my younger son Noah gave of Cabin in the Woods. It's a crazy horror film. I said, "Is it good?" And he said, "This movie is not effing around."
Which is for everybody that's put it on, say what it ever. Before I let you go, and I know this is not part of what we talked about today, but contagion. It's fascinating to me that we're limited. We had a guy on ages ago, an expert on communication, written communication, how often we misconstrue. And like my wife had an email, and oh boy, her family listens to this, from her brother. She had a completely different take on the voice, the tone, and the presentation than I did in reading it, because she had an agenda going, okay? So the fact...
Oh, this is like you're talking about the guy who said, you can text an employee, "Good job," and they may hear it as,
"Good job." I mean, similar. He picked out 3 simple ones, and it was 60% of the time they were misconstrued. Do you find that we're heading down a road with email, tweets, short attention span, Instagram, all the stuff that has to be short form, where we're misunderstanding cues and it's getting worse? Or are people now getting smarter because they have to have contagion? If you're on Instagram and you want views, you better figure it out pretty quickly or you're going to go down the tube. What's happening in that world now, if you can give us some insight?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote a book called Contagious, which is all about why things catch on. We'll save that for another day. But I think for this specific question, what I would say is this. We are talking right now through multiple mediums in some sense, right? I'm not just hearing the words you're using. I'm watching the body language you use when uttering those words. I can hear the way you say those words. And so I'm getting information from each of those channels, right? It's just like reading the newspaper versus listening to the radio versus watching television, right? There are other sources of information that come in when you have multiple media going on. And so often we can misconstrue email because it's only words. I don't have the way those words are said, the paralanguage around those words. I don't have the body language or gestures someone used or the facial expressions they made when uttering those words. And so it's really easy to misconstrue it. And so while certain ways of communicating are certainly easier, text is really easy, email can be really easy, sometimes a little bit is lost from those mediums as ways to communicate.
Well, you know what I've started doing, actually, Pete? Not so much with you, but on my text, if you have an iPhone, certainly, but I'm sure other phones do it too. In your text ability, there's a way to just send a voicemail. I can use my voice. And yes. I have found I have so much less trouble
when you do it as a voice.
When they're hearing my voice than if I'm just sending words.
Just be careful and check it. Because I've done that in the past.
Yeah.
And it was I forget what I said, but it was like, it's okay, something, and it came out as trust in God. And the person called me back and went,
well, it's not converting it to words. It's something like
endless voice. Okay, I had the
Converting voice recording. Converting words. Powerful for apologies, right? Because apologies, whenever you write an apology, it never really. But hearing that voice is right now. It seems like a real person. So he delivers them.
It's so funny. As we wrap up, I just want to tell you, I usually don't go over questions ahead of time, but your people reached out and said you have questions ahead of time. The length of time it took me to respond back because I was so aware that your word is words, and I'm going, well, I didn't want to misappropriate that. I want to give the wrong impression there. I don't want him to think that we're not going to do that, but we do jump around. Do I let him know that? Do I not let him know that?
Yeah, right.
So fascinating. And again, we just scratched the surface. Jonah's book.
Jonah, I'm serious. I'm a terrible reader, but I'm so fascinated by this conversation. I'm running out. What's the first book I should get of yours? What's the one I would enjoy the most?
Oh, goodness. It's what kind of problem do you want to solve, right? So if you're interested in language, Magic Words is good. If you're interested in why things catch on, word of mouth, why things go viral, Contagious is the best one. If you're interested in changing someone's mind, how to do that, removing barriers to change, The Catalyst is best. And there's sort of the ugly stepchild of the 4 books, which is called Invisible Influence, which guess less do, but is all about influence and how it often happens without our awareness.
Wow.
How does it feel, by the way, to have it says one of the world's most popular online courses? How popular is that course?
Millions of people have checked it out. I can't say that I had a lot to do with that. All I did was record the content, but sometimes things take a life of their own.
Fascinating. So you can check Dr. Berger out at jonahberger.com. Of course, the new book is What to Say to Get Your Way, Magic Words. And again, we've just scratched the surface. It just goes on and on and on, and light bulbs keep going off. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for the work, what you do. Yeah, fascinating. Really fascinating. Is that the right word that we want to use, fascinating? Is that fascinating the word?
The right word, but it's an appropriate word.
All right.
It is fascinating, not it was fascinating. It is fascinating.
He is fascinating. And by the way, he also was fascinating.
Yes. And
he's gone.
And now I'm going to do an accusatory you. You may have messed that up.
By the way, at my funeral, was I fascinating or am I still fascinating? What was I going to say? Is it no longer?
Going to still be a good guy.
Jonah, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jonah.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. So, I'm not sure. I got the buckets. I didn't get the words.
So
I guess I got to pay for the word.
You got to pay for the word.
I got to pay.
But what's interesting, I mean, there's so many studies and so many things that are fascinating. They did a study where people came up to people in line at a copy center and said, can I button line?
Oh, right.
Can I button line? And people would say no. And would say, can I button line because? And they gave a reason, even if it was the crappiest reason in the world.
Right.
50%
were more willing.
Willing. Now, I wonder if that's because I made contact with you as a human, or it's because I gave you the reason. I'm getting, if there's a good reason, I have my kidney and I got to get a thing.
Sure.
But it is really fascinating.
I'm going to try it at the buffet. Can I cut? Can none of you?
Because
I'm worried they're going to run out.
Yeah, but Schreewitz, because I was on Seinfeld for 9 years. Me, it's like I got to have a reason. But it is fascinating that we don't look at. I'm always stunned when I see someone, an author or somebody acclaimed, and every other sentence is like, and then I went like, and then I went here like, and
the verbal filler is something that Dana always talks to me about, and I have actively over the years tried to. I can't think about it when I'm speaking, but before I go out to speak, I do try and say, listen, you don't need the verbal placeholder, and it seems to have improved with time.
But you and I are around words all the time. You read some of the best words ever written by some of the best minds ever written. Those plays are not great by accident. You know what I mean?
But that's considered language. What I think what Jonah was talking about is where the verbal placeholders come in is in the formulation of the response. I think for a lot of people, it's the notion that of what I just did, the silence of my thought somehow is weak or is fearful. That if you ask me a question and I go, well, here's what I want to say to you, that I will have lost you. As opposed to if I go, so yeah. And now I begin, that somehow I've retained your attention.
This is bizarre, but I think written word, even in plays and stuff, has that. Gets attention by the words they use, by the certainty, whatever. But I'm thinking back, the guy who influenced you the most in college to acting was William Shatner.
Yeah.
Was Captain Kirk, did he speak with certainty all the time? Was he
Yes.
that? Yes, that's what, it's really interesting. He gave him lines that were certainty.
Yes, even when what he was speaking of expressed uncertainty. When
Right.
he said, Dr. McCoy is right in pointing out the huge risk involved engaging with creatures of another world. But risk is our business. Right? I mean,
But I'm thinking that's a character.
absolutely.
Spoke with certainty all the
Absolutely.
time.
And Spock spoke with certainty, and yet
Yes.
it's a different kind
Different kind, because it was emotionless, which is funny because then you went on to one of the most successful sitcoms where everybody showed uncertainty. Although you
Oh, you're talking about sitcom? No, I think
Seinfeld.
I think the thing in Seinfeld is you got four people absolutely certain of their point of view, and none of it is right.
So that's it. So George was certain about stuff, but completely wrong.
Right, absolutely. Jerk store is the line. Jerk store. I'm going with jerk store. I mean, it's actually
So certainty, it's really fascinating once you start taking apart
and
language.
certainty is the absolute of comedy. Look at Jackie Gleason. Look at all the great comedians, especially in television. They develop an answer to a situation that the rest of us know is absolutely wrong, but they're certain it's right,
Right.
and they won't let go.
So certainty is a powerful tool, and certainty is a huge tool in comedy.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well,
Yeah.
wow.
Now let's go to the most certain person we know, Mr. Dave
Certainly.
Guggenheim.
I always have something on everything.
I'm fascinated.
That's why I make the big bucks.
I understand.
Today, of course, we've been talking about the power of words,
Yeah.
especially how we string them together. But do you know what the first words were?
First words ever created by humans?
That is exactly right. We're talking 15,000 years ago.
I'm imagining ow.
I think
Ow would be
one of the first words I read, groin.
hot. I know that's a big one.
I'm not sure. Fire. There we go. Wait, how do we know that? Who documented that?
It was written on a wall in Sumatra.
Mark Pagel of the University of Reading School of Biological Sciences. They did research in 2013, looking through all of the records. And of course, there's no factually, they know obviously nothing was written down, but using human syntax and what would have been important at that time, they have put together what some of the first words would be, like I, we, fire, mother, and of course, because of the chosen people, no.
You know what's funny? What I think about here?
That's a good
Thank you. What I think about here, thank you for the negative. What I think about here is just like with dinosaurs. We thought they were a certain color, and then all of a sudden the Earth's up. We go, no, they're all wrong.
Yeah,
they're all right.
birds.
And other stuff, they're all wrong. Yeah. Somewhere in a cave, they're going to unearth something 20 years from now, and it's going to be a conversation that two people have said, dude, I think that's a hemorrhoid. And the other guy's going to say, you should really see somebody. And the guy's going to say, I got to wait until they invent doctor. There's going to be this whole thing that's going to prove that.
I'd love to find a cave from 50,000 years ago that has an arrow and the word exit. I'd love to just see that up on the wall, just to say.
I'm going to sue your ass.
Yeah.
Is up on a wall somewhere.
Yeah.
Because
What would, seriously, so if you didn't have language and we absolutely had to name some things in order to get along, that would make sense. Good, bad, that would make sense. What, want, need?
mine or relation,
yours.
or not.
Yeah, right.
Sex. There has to be something
I don't think that was language
for getting together.
the whole time.
Because then there has to be.
I don't think there was anything. There has to be
Gang set.
was there, David? That's why the word no was.
And then headache would be in there, right in there, and depressed.
Yeah, but if you think about it, what would you need?
Food, some kind of food thing, hunting things that would keep you. By the way, things that keep you alive, like run, bear, or name a thing.
Yeah. Why?
Bears. Oh yeah. And then you got the context of say it quicker together. It's like run bear, not run why, and he's gone.
But it is, it's interesting. We should have somebody do this. There are universal sounds that we make under certain situations, like ow. I said, what would be the first word? Ow. Almost universally, some form of ow or ouch is the sound we make when we're in pain.
But like thousands of years ago, did they make that sound, or did they go glubden? I don't know what is the first pain sound.
That would be very interesting to find out. Has it always been? Is it a breathing sound that became, vocalized?
Get on that. Let me know.
You want me to look into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Let me make up a word for how quickly I'm going to get to it.
It is interesting how language and how long it took to develop.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
But also the fact that I could influence you with just words. I like that.
It's powerful. They are powerful. And what you realize, too.
Let me see which one you go for more. You should do this show alone. You could do this show alone.
I would. Now we're doing Dr. Seuss. I would.
I can do the show alone. I can do it with a stone. I can do it with a mic. I can do it with a
guy named Ike.
Yeah.
All right. Well, are there people named Ike anymore? I guess there is.
Ike?
That's an older name, right?
Isn't Ike a nickname for
Ike and
something?
Tina Turner? I don't know.
Ike?
Mike and Ike?
Ike, it has to be a nickname. What would it be?
Look, David is Ike.
Ichabod?
Is Ike a nickname? I don't think Ike and Tina Turner, Ichabod and Tina Turner. I don't think that's the nickname. You mean Ike is the shortening of Ichabod? I don't think so.
I don't know.
David.
AI says Ike is a name, and it's commonly used as a masculine given name or nickname. It's Hebrew. He will laugh or laughter.
Okay. Oh, it's Hebrew.
Take that, Tina.
There we go. It's Hebrew.
There you go. Isaac, Isaiah,
Even though it says laughter, I don't think Tina was laughing.
The great General Eisenhower, one of the big Jews.
Not a lot of laughing around Tina. So, all right. Well, thanks.
All right. This could be the end. This should be the end. This is the end.
This was the end.
And good night.
Thank you.